Perfect. All right. So first of all, want to thank everyone for coming out and attending our webinar Wednesdays. We're really excited about this because, as David was saying with the iceberg, we know there's a lot of functions that people aren't taking advantage of in FileHold, and we want to make sure that you have a chance to see everything that we can offer and maybe build this in. Just so you know, we are recording the session. We're going to be posting this later onto our site so that you'll be able to reference this. So if you want to share any of this content, you think it's good enough that you want to show it to other people, very easy to do. And if you want to go into a deeper dive, just let us know. We're happy to connect you with your sales representative, and we can make sure we can get that process moving. Now, before I dive into Courier, it's just worth having a quick conversation about how documents are typically shared within an organization. So we want to talk about one of the issues that we have with document delivery. It's a problem that most organizations have. Obviously, physical mail is an extra work cycle. You have to take a digital document, you have to print it, and that obviously creates physical copies of it. There's usually a high direct cost to actually mail documents, and there's an indirect cost in the handling, the manipulation, the dealing with the paper, making something digital into something solid. It's all part of the process of what you need to deal with. Now, we can always email documents. But of course, we all know that there's size limitations to that. You can only share documents that are so large, or you have to do some sort of weird workaround like zipping them together and compressing them, which can obviously lead to other issues. There's no proof of delivery with an email service. When you send it off, you don't know if someone's actually received it. Yes, you can ask for a read receipt, but it's never 100% certain. You don't have that proof that someone's actually looked at the document, only that they've received an email. And most importantly, it's a non-secure transmission. It always uses some sort of external email server. Even if you have something of your own, you're still bringing another object into that, which has to be controlled. Now, we do know that we can do document delivery through workflow within FileHold, and those of you who've used workflow before will probably be nodding and saying, yes, of course, we can do that. The problem is that workflow is an internal process. It does require you to have a FileHold membership in order to have access to the document. You also need document visibility to use that. And so we've developed Courier as a workaround for some of these challenges. So because it's secure document delivery over email, we get a lot of benefits. The biggest one is proof of delivery. Not only do you know when someone's opened a document, but you have an exact timestamp as to when they've accessed that document, and you can see all of that as part of the audit trail for each of those documents when they go out. You're sending a link instead of an attachment, and links are fundamentally more controllable, and they're also tiny in size, and they almost take up no existence when you send an email. So unlike sending, you can send, instead of having to compress a file down to get it to attach, you can simply send a link to it, no problem for the other side to receive it. So you can do terabytes worth of data if you want to through a link sent automatically through Courier. You can do both internal or external recipients. So external is obvious. I've got an email address. I can send someone a document. But the internal is a really powerful function too, because it means you can send something inside of your own network using Courier, sort of similar to a one-task workflow. You can do a view or an approve. So you can actually ask someone to approve a document, require an email, a password on that so that they can register into it. You can get that e-signature onto the document. So it's a more powerful function than just sending off something as an email attachment. You can make it dynamic as an approval and have that logged into FileHold as well. Because it's a link, we have control over that link. So that link can be canceled, rescinded, it can be expired. So you're not just sending a document out and permanently having it live in someone else's server. You can say, here's your document, you have 14 days to look at this, and at the end of that time, it's disappearing. So again, you've got some more power with that tool. You can control access to your user groups. So unlike an email, you can say that this group is going to have access to Courier, but that one is not. Those of you who are FileHold users probably know what I mean by the groups. We're talking about like you have administrators and you want to give them the right to see a document, but these other people, you don't. And most importantly, it can be employed as a single task workflow. And what I mean by that is you can do this for a one task workflow, out it goes, and go to an internal to an external. It's a very powerful sort of overall functional tool. Now, some use cases for Courier: you can send an invoice to a vendor. You can gather comments or approvals for a contract, sending large files directly from the repository, such as a video file, send it directly from the FileHold repository. You can do an internal distribution of controlled information. This is particularly important if you have sensitive documents that otherwise someone doesn't have a right to see. Now, you know, with workflow, when somebody, in order for someone to be involved with workflow, they have to have a right to see a document. So we control document access using the cabinet, the folder, and the schema. So what do you want to do if you want to share a document that that person otherwise doesn't have a right to see? You don't want to give them access to every one of those documents. So instead, you can send it as a courier transmission and send that one document as a controlled document. I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. We can also do read receipts when they're required for an HR document. You're sending someone a particular, it's like, here's our new manual. I need you to review this. I can send that over and I can capture that read receipt, even though it's someone who may never be involved in FileHold again. We can also do controlled document distribution, so only a supervisor can send a document. So even though it's an invoice, only the supervisor for the accounting department can send that off to somebody else. So again, we're giving those levels of control for the document. Now, a couple of considerations to think about for FileHold Courier. Who will it be sent to? Who is my recipient? Where is this going to? Who will be sending it? Who's going to be receiving it on the who's going to be sending it off from my side? So not only who's getting it, but who's sending it off over from here. How flexible does a template need to be? Stone versus plastic. I use this all the time in my training to talk about workflow, that you can make things highly adaptable for your FileHold users when they send the courier transmission off, or you can make them rigid and set in a way that makes sense for the business use case. So how flexible do you want the template to be? And finally, how common will courier transmissions be? Is this something you're doing as a one-off? You probably won't be sending this off again, or is this something you're doing 2 or 3 times a day? Again, worth consideration for your templates. And so with that, let's get out of this presentation here, and let's hop in and take a look at our FileHold. So those of you who are FileHold users will recognize this. I'm over here in my system administration menu. We can see the FileHold button up top here on the ribbon, so I can hop back over to my library if I want to. So just by clicking that, it'll take me out of my admin and back over to here. And then from this, I can go into my administration and I can take a look at my different templates under the workflow management, courier templates, and off it is. And these are my different templates. Now, again, if you're familiar with FileHold, if you've used us before, you know that a lot of what we do is template-based. We don't just build a workflow, we build a workflow template, and then we apply it to a document. We don't just build a metadata field, we build a metadata field template, and then we apply it to a document. So with that same idea, we're going to be looking at courier templates in that same way. You can have one template for one process, or you can have a general template that's used upon multiple document types, accessible by multiple different groups. So let's start by, before I go into the templates and building these out, and I do want to cover that today too, I want to show you a little bit about the mechanics of building these. Let's start by actually launching a document into Courier, and then we'll see what that's like to use. So I'm going to step away from the web client. I'm going to go over to the desktop application. Again, those of you might know what this looks like. We've got our library over here, documents appear over here, our metadata properties over on the side panel here, which I can open up to take a look if I need to. So now what I want to do is I want to take a look at one of my documents in a section. Here's our use case for this. Maybe I've got incident reports that are being generated by a department, and they want to report on, there's an incident that happened and they want to have a record of it. So they create an incident report, and now they need to send that over to the participants of that incident, whoever was involved with it, to get their feedback or their comments. Now, because it's an incident report, we don't want those to be publicly exposed. So the idea is that if you weren't a very high-level administrator within FileHold, or you weren't a member of that HR team, you wouldn't get to see these documents. They would be hidden from you. So we can come over to over here where I've logged an incident report, and we'll see I've got a document over here. So incident involving me, and it happened today. Okay, I'm in trouble. So it happened a couple days ago, and it's logged into the system, and now I've got my incident. And when I select it, I can see the metadata fields for it, including my email address that I'm using for this test account in this environment. So I've logged this document into here. Now, I as a user wouldn't have a right to see this, but as an administrator or as part of the HR team, I do want to see this. So now I want to send this over to Chris to get Chris's feedback on it. I want to make sure that Chris has an opportunity to look at this incident report before I file it. So I could have other workflow processes on this, but in this case, if it's a workflow, it means I have to give Chris exposure to all the other incident reports, which we certainly don't want to do. So it's a perfect use case for Courier. So I'm going to right click on my document. You'll see that I've got some different options here. Right below is Courier, and I can choose Initiate Incident Report Review. this screen is going to pop up and it's going to give me the opportunity to interact with it. Now notice here that some of these fields are grayed out. Those are ones that I've locked into place. They're stone. I can't make any changes to them. Some of them though are a bit more plastic. If I come over here and click on this icon, it's going to ask to who I want to send it. I want to send this internally. So because it's an internal courier transmission, I can choose the user. So I can choose Chris out of the list, add user, and now Chris is the recipient of this document. Now I could add other internal users to this. There's no problem with doing that, but this is my first one that I'm going to add in, and I'll say OK. So now I've got my source name, which means I know this is ready to go. I'm going to get into the mechanics of what we're seeing on screen here later, so don't worry. I'm just going to show you the basics of this, and now I can send off my courier transmission. And off it goes. So now Courier has been launched. You'll see that my icon over here for this, if I select this, you'll see it's changed from, it was a green light before, now it's a yellow light because the document's gone off, and you can see that it's pending approval because I've actually done this as an approval transmission. So this document is now under FileHold control. I'm not able to check the document out or delete it because it's been locked down by the process. So again, we're using some of those same mechanics that we see with our workflow in order to protect the document once it's gone off into its process. So now I need to wait for, well, basically for me to receive that email. And unfortunately, I kind of have to wait for the speed of Outlook, but fortunately, I'm lucky today it came in right away. So there's my, it's not a FileHold thing, that's much more of an Outlook and the server speed. So fortunately, this has come through. So this is what your recipient would receive. So hello, Chris, you're receiving this notification on behalf of Chris. Chris is asking you to approve one document. I know it's silly, but we're just doing this for the demo. Imagine if I was somebody else, then it would have been sent on behalf of that somebody else. So he's asking you to approve one document by a particular date. So we've got a timeline onto this. The instructions to this notification are the following. Please read the incident report attached. Is there any feedback? Please mark in the comments. Mark as approved when done. Open transmission to complete the approved task. So now the user clicks on the open transmission and we're opening up a web client. So we're not actually using FileHold right now, we're just using an interface that we've been given. We can see that I've got some information on this, such as the sender, the date that it was sent, who can view it, the transmission number, and then I've got my instructions over here. Now all it's giving me as an option right now is do not approve. And it's giving me that protection because I haven't accessed this document yet. Until I access the document, I can't actually do an approval. This is a proof of viewing. Now I can pretend to open the document, but no software can actually force someone's eyes to read a document. All I can do is give all the mechanics into place to allow someone to access it. So when I click on the eye icon over here, it opens up and it gives me the option to view the document, or I can cancel this. Now this doesn't cancel the courier transmission, it simply closes that screen for myself. And in this case, I'm going to choose View. We're going to open up a new tab over here, and it's going to open it up using the FileHold Viewer. Those of you who are used to the FileHold Viewer, you'll recognize this. Here's my incident report, obviously just a template that I'm using for the purposes of the demo, but you see that this allows me to open this PDF using the portal. Now what's very important about this is I've prevented access to being able to print the document, and I've prevented access to being able to download the document. Again, I'm trying to put controls over this because this is a sensitive document that I don't want other people to see. I'm authorized to see this because I'm the participant. So I look at my document, I say, yes, I can see my report, that's good. I can't interact with this document, but I can view it. So I'm done with that, I can close this, and now I've got the option to approve it. I can now hit approve, and I've got the opportunity to make a comment. This looks right to me. So now I've made my comment on the document. If I wanted to, I could even do an attachment back. So if I did have the ability to make changes to it, I could make changes to this document, reattach it, and send it back into the system. Again, further points of engagement. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and click approve, and I've completed my my courier task in this case. And you can see my comment is on there. I can show the transmission details if I want to. And I've got a thumbs up. That's the FileHold symbol for approved. We're done. No further interaction needed at this point. So that's the courier experience. That's once everything's built into the system. It's right click and launch. You can then send the courier document off, and then it can be received on the other side. Now, before I go any further or try to show another example of that, let's go under the hood a little bit and take a look at the settings for Courier and see what's happening here. Now, I should mention, Courier is a standard feature for internal use. So if you don't have any Courier transmissions set up right now, you can absolutely ask us. We're happy to give you 100 free transmissions to give a try for external users. but you can use Courier right now for your own team. You have no restrictions over that if you're a FileHold user. All you have to do is enable the function. And if you're curious to know where that is, we'll just go over to our web client. So open up the web client. We'll go over to our full administration menu. Under System Configuration, Settings, General, the first thing you'll see up here is Enable Courier under Courier Settings. So in this section right here, click that and Courier will be enabled. Now you can come down to your Courier templates and you can build them out if you want to. So adding a template's a fairly simple process. We just click onto here and it's a single screen. We can do all of our work onto here. We'll only move off of this when we deal with the recipients, but for now this is good enough. So we'll call this webinar Courier test. So we've got a simple name onto it. We can give a description onto this for webinar only. And pardon my typing. I'm a terrible typist. I don't know why I bother, but there we are. Now we've got some different fields onto this. I just want to take us through each of these one by one. First one here is schemas. This is what we've attached to. Now those of you who've used workflow will know that when you first create a template, this will be empty and there's no interaction with it. We don't apply the template to the schema. We take the schema and we apply the Courier template there. So that's where we'll apply this. Right now, we're just in sort of our working mode. Our next section here is target date, and these are what we're going to set for our settings onto this particular document. So for instance, approval or viewing due by X number of days and X number of hours from transmission. So if I wanted something that was going to be due in 6 hours, I could say it was going to be, let's try and come into this so I can interact with it. So click on the checkbox in front and then change this to 0, tab over, and say 6. So this is going to be in 0 days and 6 hours. So you can change this whatever time makes the most sense for you. I can also send reminders. So for example, if this is something that's important and I want to make sure someone hasn't missed that first email, I can then say send a reminder after 3 hours on that. So now we're going to send out 2 emails. One is a note and the second one is a reminder. Transmission can expire after a length of time. So if I'm only giving them 6 days and I want that link to go away, I can say that after 1 day's time, it's a dead link. So what you saw before when I said open Courier transmission, that opened up the Courier transmission for me. If it had been expired, it would have let me know that it was expired and it was no longer an active link. So this is that control over top of it. I can rescind a transmission, but I can also set it to expire. So I'm not sending constantly live links that anybody can access anytime they want to. I've still got control over that link. It's still from my system, and I can turn it off when I want to or set it to expire, so it's not just a live link in perpetuity. Now I can also choose how this transmission is going to finish, how we're going to end on the transmission. I can say it's going to be complete when all the users have viewed or downloaded the documents. So in that case, if I'm dealing with a document where I'm sending it to multiple people, I can wait for all of them. I send it to 3 people. I need 3 completes before we're going to complete the whole transmission. Our second setting over here is complete all views when 1 user has viewed or downloaded the document. So if I send this to 3 people, but I really only need 1 of them to acknowledge it, good enough. Then I can close it off there and complete the transmission. And our last one here is complete all views immediately when the transmission is sent. This is used for when I don't actually care if they viewed the document or not. Now notice here it's not giving me the option for download. This is a view-only function. So if I'm dealing with a document that cannot be viewed, then this may not come up as an option. This is only for when I'm sending it and I don't care if they've seen it or not on the other side. This is an FYI for them. If they don't open it, it doesn't impact my operations, so I can leave it there. Our next category over here is sender notifications. So how we're going to be letting them know when something is overdue. So as opposed to a reminder, this is the tap on the shoulder to let them know, by the way, you have something that's about to become overdue, you need to jump on it, and then again I can repeat that notification. So it's a nice auto nag feature in case it's needed. We have some other options down here, and you'll see some of them are grayed out. That's because right now I don't have any tasks defined for that down here. So if I was to define these tasks, then some of these will turn on. So for instance, right now, allow postpone approval. If you know workflow, we have that approval postponement function. We can bring that in over here. That's where you're going to say, I need to delay the approval of this document, but it's due to outside circumstances, not the document itself. The document itself is fine. We're not approving it, but we need to instead postpone that. We can bring that same idea into our Courier transmission, so we can mark it as allow the approval to be postponed. But until I have an approval task, until I define this Courier transmission as an approval, this will remain grayed out. Now I can require anybody to have a password for access. And so by selecting that, now the user must put in a password for it. And if it's their first time using Courier, I'm going to ask them to define that password for me. So again, it gives me a bit more of that control over top of the document. Require approval password can again only be selected if I have an approval task. So if I was to select approval, then this would that checkbox would turn on. And again, in order for someone to do an approval, I have to have them use the same password they did for their require access. So again, we're building in that e-signature capability to do a signifier towards that user. Allow attach feedback document. You saw that selected before. I had the option of adding a feedback document. I don't have to give that to them. I can take that away and just say, hey, look at this document, or do an approval on it and don't do anything else. And the reason it's grayed out, we can only do the attachment when we're doing an approval task because we need some level of authenticity towards the transmission. And then finally, two basic ones, disable download and disable printing, two functions I had turned on over there, so I was able to control access to both of those. So those are our basics for the setup. Now we can deal with the actual recipients of the task. So I can click on the plus sign and we can now add our recipients. First thing I have to do is define what I'm asking them to do. Is this going to be a view task or an approved task? We're going to choose approve just so I can show you those checkboxes turned on when we go back there. Now the source type is how I'm going to be sending off this transmission, who's going to be receiving it. And I've got three choices for this: external, internal, or metadata. A metadata will simply choose a field that I select. So if I was to choose metadata, for example, and say OK, then I can choose which of my fields I want to be. So for example, I could use an email address if I wanted. So where is email? There we go. So I could use an email address as a metadata field. So then whatever that email address is on the document, that's what I'm going to use. By the way, anybody who's done a FileHold training session with me, I've used your email address within the metadata fields for your video that I put into FileHold, and then I use that to launch Courier. So there's a great practical use case for using that. I use it on a daily basis. Let's go back up here to our metadata. I'm going to change this instead to an internal. Now it's going to switch over and it's going to be my FileHold groups and my FileHold users. Now here we're not really worried about whether or not the user has a right to see that document because we're giving them permission to see it by using the Courier transmission. And that's why we can control access to Courier through the groups. So we can say that these document publishers aren't allowed to use Courier, but these library administrators are. We can give them permission that way. And then our last use for this is external, which is very simple. It wants an email address. And I could put multiple addresses in here, put a comma or a semicolon in between them to indicate the difference between each of them. And I could list out as many as I want to. I can then put our instructions into here as to what I want it to look like. So as I saw before, we saw our instructions in the Courier transmission. Here's where I can define that. Now in this case, if I fill out these fields, if I put in an email address, if I put in my instructions, I'm making this very rigid. We're putting this into that stone mode again, where we're saying this is this task for this document. But if I wanted to, I could just hit cancel on this. We can go back over to here, and I can use this over here, which is allow the sender to define. And by clicking this, now the sender is going to define that for me. I don't have to choose any of those fields because I'm going to allow the sender in order to make that definition. Now I want to show you a couple of other very quick things and then we're going to move on. One of them is the transmission details over here. So I can define which of these values are going to be available for the transmission details. So I can put customized titles or approved titles or actions into this using metadata fields, and I can add information to this if I want to. We've also got our document details over here, so any of those fields of information that I might want to pull in that I can use, and here's why that's important. In my notification emails, I can do formatting. So I can define what those messages are going to be within the emails for that first notification, for a reminder. If I cancel the message, what is going to be sent to the user, whether or not it's overdue soon, any of those particular points that I want to have for that process, I can define over here and then use those merge tags to bring information over from the document and attach them in here. There's actually a lot more information onto this. I'm not going to go through it. Of course, we've got a help icon at the top here. So if you want to explore this further, I highly recommend it. It really makes this personalized and brings that impact into there. I haven't even touched these for today, even for the samples that I'm using. I'm just using whatever our stock is. So once I've defined all these different fields and I'm satisfied that I've met my brief for what I want to use Courier for, I can then save this and it becomes a viable template. I can come over to my document schemas, and then from here I can then choose any of my schemas, like my draft reports, come down over to Courier, and then go into Edit, and then choose one of my templates to add to it. So in this case, we had Webinar Courier Test, and I can add that to the schema, and that's now an available Courier transmission that I can use. And you can see it's got my description on there as well. So I've built that in. It's now ready to go and be deployed when I send a document off. So before I wrap up over here, because those are the basics of what I wanted to show you, I'm just going to show you one more Courier transmission. We're going to do this now to an external user, so somebody who's not part of the FileHold system. So before I was doing it as an internal transmission, now we're going to do it as an external transmission. External transmissions involve a courier cost. So there's a cost per successful transmission, and we send it off to somebody externally. We're going to, there's a charge for it of one courier transmission. If I do it as, and they allow a feedback document, there could be a second charge onto there when it's complete. Now we only do the courier charge when it's a completed transmission. We do the charges like a book of stamps. So you can buy between 1,000 to I think 100,000 we can do in transmissions. And yes, we do have clients who use that level of courier transmissions. And when you buy them, they can be as low as 15 cents per successful transmission, which is far less expensive than any sort of authorized courier service you might use for paper, plus all of the savings into there. So in this case, I'm going to go back over to my AR, and I've got an invoice that I want to send out to someone. So here's an invoice. It's going to go out to Arlo's Restaurant. So I can select my document, see my metadata for it. In this case, we're going to right-click onto it, go to Courier, and say, initiate invoice transmission. So now I'm sending them their invoice. Again, I'm using the metadata field, so I'm using a non-FileHold account for this. So this is not a user account that I have, it's just a test account that I've created, and I can send this off. Now, because I'm reading the metadata, I don't need to make this very plastic. This is pretty rigid for me because all I'm doing is launching it and hitting send, and off it goes. So my document's gone out, and in this case, I haven't done this as an approval task, so I'm not locking this document down while it's going through workflow. You can see the document is still accessible for me. I can then go over to my Gmail over here, and now we're waiting for the speed of Gmail to come in. Let's just give this a refresh in case that's going to be helpful. I don't know. Nope, it hasn't come in yet because the transmission still has to go out. It has to run through the system. I'm going to get a request for this very similar to this over here, where then I can open the transmission. Oh, look, there's a new message. So let's come back over here. Here's my view document. I can open this up. And let's go ahead and open the transmission. Again, it's going to give me this same portal that I saw over here. I can view the document. Because I'm sending it as an invoice, I've allowed download, I've allowed print, I've allowed those different functions. And if I want to, I could say view on the document. It's going to open up using this, and I could print it off if I wanted to, or I could simply download the document. But either way, now that I've accessed it, I've got a green light over this. The courier transmission is completed. There's no further work that I need to do onto this. So that, in a nutshell, is our courier service. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please let us know. You can always get a hold of us at sales@filehold.com or reach out to your sales representative and see what some of the options are. As I say, we're going to post this, so hopefully some of your team are able to look at this later. David, have we had some questions that have come in today?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll start off with the first one that came in, and if you have any further questions, just keep typing away. We'll answer all the questions that come in the chat window. So our first question that came in is does the sender and recipient both need to have FileHold?
No, just the sender. It's only the person who's initiating the courier needs to be a FileHold user.
Okay, next question we have here is, does Courier work with mobile devices?
Yes, it does. We have a courier interface for this. So if anyone's used FileHold Mobile, it's just a different, it's a simplified version of the interface. And so you could absolutely access it from a mobile device. You saw what the interface looked like there. It's very simplified, but it's been designed to be opened up through that as well. So it basically uses our FileHold Mobile application interface for doing the viewing of the document.
All right, another question here is, which FileHold viewer do you have to use? Will it work with FileHold Viewer 1?
It's the level 1 viewer. So it's going to work on your image files. I believe it'll work on DocX to be able to preview them as well, but it won't work on an Excel document at this point, although I believe that's something we're working on for future versions of the software.
All right, another question here is, does Courier integrate with Active Directory?
It could. Essentially, the way I'd see it working with Active Directory is if you had a list of users into there and you're sending it for an internal transmission. So if that's the case, if you're populating your list of available users from, potentially an Active Directory list of users, then yes, it would.
Okay, next question here is, how do customers track Courier licenses?
How do they which?
Track Courier
Oh,
licenses.
track courier licenses. Thank you for asking. Let's hop back over into my system and I'll show that to you. Actually, and I appreciate asking that because I didn't show this before and I probably should have. So I'm going to go over into our web client again, and we're over in a couple of different options. As an administrator, I can take a look at my courier usage log, and this is actually going to be a log of any of the courier transmissions that have been sent. So we'll see that any of the ones that I did today will appear in the top here. So I can see the different returned, reserved, consumed, reserved. I can see the log of the actions into here. From a user point of view, I can go over to my workflow management, courier transmission report, and then I've got all the same filters that I have when I'm looking at, same thing with the workflow. So I can say, I want to see all of my courier transmissions. In this case, I'm just going to apply the filter and we can see all the actions. So I can see the viewed, the approved, the expired, all the different things that have happened, and then I can show them from when they were transmitted to organize them from, let's go to transmitted. So I can see these from oldest to newest or newest to oldest, and I can see the ones that we just did today, so viewed and approved actions that were done, and some testing I did earlier, some canceled ones. So I can track each of those transmissions through. Thank you very much for asking that, and I feel silly that I forgot to mention that before.
All right, got another question here, ready to wrap up here, Chris. What happens if someone were to issue a courier license in error? Are you refunded for this error? What happens?
If you cancel a transmission or the transmission is not completed, that is, the person on the other side never opens the document, you are not billed. You are only billed on for a successful courier transmission. Now, obviously, if it's an internal, there's no charge anyway because you're only using it for the internal service. But if I was to send, for example, someone who's on our call today, they're not in our FileHold system, so I was to send you a courier transmission and that's never completed, there is no charge for that transmission.